The night was thick with humidity, the kind that sticks to your skin and makes the air feel heavy. I stood in front of the open fridge, staring blankly at the rows of neatly stacked leftovers, but my mind was elsewhere. A car door slammed outside. My heart kicked up a notch. He was here. I hadn't seen him in years, not since I was a teenager, and even then, our encounters had been brief. A few family gatherings, awkward small talk over Thanksgiving dinners. Now, as an adult, the idea of him staying in our house felt strange. Not bad, not good, just something I hadn't prepared for. I closed the fridge and wiped my palms on my shorts. My mother's voice floated in from the living room, warm and welcoming. I took a deep breath and walked in. There he was, taller than I remembered, broader, a man who had seen the world, who had lived outside of this small town, beyond the routines I had spent my entire life repeating. He turned, his gaze locking onto mine for just a beat too long. "Wow," he said, tilting his head slightly. "You look different." I smiled, unsure what to say. "So do you." He laughed, the sound deep and effortless, as if nothing about this situation was unusual to him. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe I was the only one who felt the shift, the subtle hum of something I couldn't quite name. Dinner was the usual family affair, my mother filling the space with stories, asking him about his job, his travels, the places he had seen. I listened, absorbing every detail. He spoke with an ease I envied, as if life had unfolded exactly the way he wanted. I found myself studying the way he carried himself, the way his hands moved when he spoke, the way he took his time before answering a question. There was something captivating about him, something that made me sit up straighter, pay closer attention. It wasn't attraction. That would be ridiculous. It was admiration, curiosity. At least, that's what I told myself. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I replayed our conversation. The way he looked at me, the way I felt under his gaze. I was overthinking it. Had to be. But deep down, I already knew. This visit wasn't going to be just another family reunion. The next morning, I found him on the porch, sipping coffee like he had nowhere else to be. The sky was still pale, the air thick with the scent of damp earth. I hesitated in the doorway, debating whether to step outside or pretend I didn't see him. Before I could decide, he looked up. "Didn't take you for an early riser," he said, his voice easy, amused. "I'm not," I admitted, stepping onto the worn wooden boards. "Just couldn't sleep." He nodded like he understood. Maybe he did. There was a quiet comfort in the way he sat there, like he belonged to this moment, like the world outside could wait. I leaned against the railing, letting the silence settle. "Still figuring things out?" he asked. It caught me off guard. "Aren't we all?" A slow smile pulled at the corner of his mouth. "Yeah," he said. "I guess we are." Something about the way he said it made me wonder what he wasn't telling me. He had always been the one who left, the one with a life that stretched beyond this small town. Yet here he was, back in a place that no longer felt like home. I wanted to ask why, but the words caught in my throat. Maybe I didn't really want to know. The drive felt endless, the road stretching ahead in a blur of faded asphalt and scattered billboards. He was behind the wheel, one hand resting lazily on the gear shift, the other draped over the steering wheel. I watched the way his fingers tapped idly, in sync with the low hum of the radio. "You sure this is a good idea?" I asked, shifting in my seat. He glanced at me, amusement flickering across his face. "You worried?" "No," I said too quickly. "Just wondering why we're doing this." His lips curled slightly. "Because you suggested it?" I had. It was my idea to get out of the house, to drive with no real destination. I didn't expect him to agree so easily. Now we were miles from home, a stretch of empty road behind us, the weight of something unspoken lingering in the air. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows through the windshield. He pulled into a roadside diner, the neon sign buzzing faintly in the twilight. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of coffee and fried food. We slid into a booth, the cracked vinyl seats warm from the day's heat. You ever think about leaving for good? I asked, stirring my drink. His gaze met mine, steady, unreadable. Sometimes, he admitted. But every place starts to feel the same after a while. I wanted to ask if that's why he was back. If he was running from something or just circling the same roads, hoping they'd lead somewhere different. But I stayed quiet, letting the question hang between us, unanswered. The night air was thick, warm, carrying the scent of asphalt and pine. We leaned against the car, the neon glow of the diner casting soft light over his face. He exhaled slowly, watching the empty road like it held an answer neither of us had the courage to ask for. I used to think I'd outrun this place, he said, his voice quieter than before. That if I kept moving, it wouldn't pull me back. I studied him, the tension in his jaw, the way his fingers gripped the edge of the hood like he needed something solid to hold on to. I wanted to ask if it worked, if the distance had ever made him feel free. But I already knew the answer. Instead, I said, maybe it's not the place that pulls us back. He turned, his gaze locking onto mine. For a second, the world shrank, the distant hum of traffic fading into nothing. There was something electric in the air, something unspoken but undeniable. And then it happened. It was instinct, or maybe inevitability. A moment we had both seen coming but refused to acknowledge. There were no second thoughts, no hesitation, just the quiet certainty that whatever this was, it had already been set in motion long before tonight. When we finally stepped back, the silence between us wasn't awkward. It was heavier, filled with something neither of us dared to name. He exhaled, shaking his head with a soft chuckle, like he couldn't believe it either. We should go, I said. He nodded, but neither of us moved. The road back felt different. The same turns, the same headlights cutting through the dark. But everything had shifted. He drove in silence, one hand gripping the wheel, the other resting on the gear shift. I could still feel the weight of what had happened between us, lingering like the last notes of a song that refused to fade. I didn't regret it. That surprised me. The neon signs of the diner had blurred behind us, but the moment was burned into my mind. The stillness, the inevitability, the way it had felt like crossing an invisible line that had always been there, waiting. I glanced at him. He looked calm, unreadable. But his grip on the wheel was tight, knuckles just slightly too white. You okay? I asked. His lips parted, like he was going to say something, but he just exhaled instead. Yeah. Liar. I turned my gaze back to the road. The closer we got home, the heavier it felt. Reality was creeping back in, dulling the edges of whatever this had been. A stolen moment that couldn't exist outside of that quiet space we had carved out for ourselves. A mile from the house, he finally spoke. This doesn't change anything. It was a statement, not a question. I swallowed hard, willing myself to nod. No, I agreed, even though we both knew it wasn't true. He pulled into the driveway, cutting the engine. The house was dark, silent. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then, just as I reached for the door handle, he said my name. Not like before, not casual, not distant. There was something else in his voice this time. I froze, waited, and then, I wish I'd met you somewhere else. It was quiet, almost like he didn't mean to say it out loud, but he had. And it hit me harder than anything else that night. I opened my mouth, but no words came. Because what could I say? He was right. I stepped out of the car into the heavy night air and walked inside without looking back. And that was the moment I knew. Some things aren't meant to be, no matter how much we wish they were.